Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about everything that I read in the month of September. I have so many books to go through today because I was very productive with my reading last month. If you saw my previous September TBR video, then you know that I was aiming to read mostly top rated books on Goodreads. So I went through my TBR on Goodreads and I chose a few books that were the absolute top rated on there, and then I decided to read them all in the month of September, and it actually worked out pretty well. I read other books as well during the month. I ended up reading about 18 books, which is crazy. But basically I realized halfway through this month that if I wanted to hit the goal of reading 200 books this year, then for the last 3 months of the year, I need to read 18 or 19 books every month. So I did kind of push myself with the intention to do that. I wanted to finish one more book so I could read just 19. I know it's crazy and I know it doesn't matter to read 200 books in a year. It's just I've gotten close a few times and I thought it'd be nice to hit like that round number. I was really pleased with all of the books that I read this month, and there's a lot more much higher rated books that I managed to get to this month than usual. Normally I average out very much in the middle. My 3-star ratings usually dominate in my wrap-up videos, but this month I have at least 9 or 10 books that I'm putting in the 4 and 5-star category. So I'm really pleased about that, and I think my strategy worked really well. So as usual, I like to kind of go through this video in some kind of order. So I'm going to do this video in terms of the best books that I read in the month, and then all the way down to the ones that I did not enjoy as much. But the lowest rated book on this list is 2.5 stars. So I had a pretty good reading month. I'm very pleased with myself. I also managed to read 3 of the Booker Prize shortlisted books. So I'm going to give you all of my thoughts on those as well. I'll do that probably right at the beginning of this video, and then the rest of the video will be ranked in a normal way from best to worst. So maybe I'll start off with talking about the Booker Prize nominated books that I read. So I read 3, and one of them I am rating 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. So let's start off with that book, and that book is The Safekeep. This one really took me by surprise, and I was so grateful for that. I was not that excited to read it because it is kind of described as a historical fiction, and I don't know, something about the description of this book just didn't get me really excited to read it. But I ended up actually doing this for my friend book club, and I absolutely loved this one. It was so much more gripping than I thought it was going to be. I literally read it, I think, in a day and a half. This book is set about 15 years after the end of the Second World War, and you are following a woman who lives in this very rural Dutch countryside, and she lives in this house all alone, and her mother has died and her brothers have moved away, and so it's just her living in this house. She has everything exactly how she likes it. She's a very exact type of person, and she is perfectly okay just living there all alone. One day her brother comes around and he drops off his new girlfriend, who he wants to stay with his sister in this house, and this just utterly disrupts our main character's life in every way, because this woman, when she comes to stay, is just the opposite to her in every possible way. She is messy and loud, and these two just clash from the absolute get-go. I just loved how tense this book was in so many ways, because there is kind of a central kind of eeriness, an eerie mystery going on about this relationship between these two women, and there's also a tension just in terms of their personal relationship, but there's this other mysterious thing going on about this house that they're living in. And I really enjoyed just how many layers of kind of intrigue there were in this book, and while you're thinking about one thing, kind of being distracted, then something else is kind of unraveling. I thought the writing was really beautiful, very straightforward, but I just really enjoyed it. And this is just the exact type of historical fiction that I really love. And I was actually thinking that it really reminds me of Tracy Chevalier's writing, and then I realized she actually has quoted on the front. So if you like Tracy Chevalier, which is The Girl with a Pearl Earring or The Lady and the Unicorn, this is very much a similar type of vibe to that. So I'd highly recommend. So that is one of my 5 stars for this month. But before I jump into my other 5 stars, I'll just run you down the other 2 books that I read for the Booker Prize shortlist this month. And in terms of my favorite out of the other 2, I next read James, and this one I'm convinced is going to win, but it's definitely not my favorite. Obviously my favorite is going to be The Safekeep. This one I'm convinced is going to win, Lots and lots of people absolutely adore this book. Unfortunately, it really wasn't for me. I think there are many reasons why you could really enjoy this book. A lot of it just didn't really work for me. Basically, this book is a retelling of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn, but from the point of view of the slave who runs away with Huckleberry Finn, James, or Jim. And I have read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and I didn't like it. I don't love Mark Twain's writing and I didn't enjoy the story very much. I didn't really get the hype about it. And so I was kind of like a little bit nervous going into this one already. And I have to say it's very, very different. It is telling the story, but it's, first of all, it changes the story quite considerably, which I think is good and is for the better. But also it's like nothing like the original in tone or anything. My issue was more that this book is a satire and I don't think it was effectively satiring like as well as it thought it was. I don't know, like maybe that's me being incredibly harsh, because this is a good book. I'm being slightly harsher on it because I think I've only ever seen amazing reviews for it, so I want to like kind of be a bit more of a voice on the other side if you haven't heard that yet. But basically this book is all about James, or Jim, and he has basically two kind of personalities and he code switches between the two, whether he's talking to his fellow slaves and his family or he's talking to any white person in this book. But honestly, a lot of the messaging about how James and Jim was acting was, I thought, just like very reductive, and it just like, it was very much of like the, oh, like if you can debate philosophers then therefore you're smart, and if you talk in a different way then you are dumb. And it like, I get what they were trying to do to satirize it and use James as kind of having this hidden life to be his way of kind of surviving, and like, and I really do understand all of that side of it, but I just did not like that dichotomy that was kind of built up in this book, and then used like proof that James was smart because he could speak a certain way or like talk about certain theoretical or political ideas. I think that it could have been done in, I don't know, it just could have been done in a different way. I think that also lots of people say that this is funny. I didn't really find it funny. I think they mean that it is a satire. It is still a very brutal book. One thing for it though, I read it incredibly quickly. It is mostly dialogue, so it is incredibly fast paced to get through, but I did feel like I really lacked a lot of atmosphere within this book because it's so fast paced and it's so heavily done with dialogue, and the dialogue wasn't my favorite, like I said, about the kind of language thing. So that's my opinion on James, although I did still give this like a 3 star. So this is kind of in the middle for me, and I would recommend it to some people, but just in case you haven't heard any kind of like other voices around this book. But I'm still convinced that this one is actually going to win the Booker Prize in the end, but we'll see. And then the last one that I read for the Booker Prize shortlist was actually Orbital. And I'm so surprised that this is my least favorite, because actually this one was the one out of all of the nominated books that I thought that I would like the most, because this is a sci-fi book, and often I do just really gravitate towards sci-fi, but I actually don't think that this is sci-fi in any way. I would actually more say that this is like a type of poetry book. It's a very lyrical book. It's not got characters in like any kind of meaningful way. There are 6 people and they are on this space station that is orbiting the Earth, and you're following them over the course of one day, but the characters aren't like actually characters that you would be following in like a normal plot. There isn't actually really a plot in this. It's kind of like meditations on space, and it's very poetic and it is very beautiful in parts, but it's just like not what I thought I was going to get in for, and it's not usually my type of book. I can see why people would love this, but just not really for me. And this one I think was like a 2.5 or like 2 stars for me, which seems harsh, but yeah, I just didn't really enjoy actually reading that one. So that is my thoughts on the 3 from the Booker Prize shortlist that I've actually read. I would love to know if you've read any of the others from the shortlist and what you recommend to me as well, because I'm hearing really different thoughts on all of the different other books. But let's get back to the main list and go on to the next book that I also rated 5 stars this month, and that book is Private Rites by Julia Armfield. I loved this book and I was really hoping I would. I also really enjoyed her book that came out I think last year, the one that is Our Wives Under the Sea. But I liked that one. I didn't love it and I really hoped I would love it, but this one is so much more my thing. I just absolutely loved it. It had everything I liked from her first book, or that book, I don't know if it's actually her first book, and into this one just with like an added level of like all the stuff that I love. So in this book, it's kind of a dystopian story, and you're following these three sisters, and basically it's set in the near future where like our world has just not stopped raining and people are dealing with incredible floods, and people live in like very high-rise kind of flats trying to prop themselves up from just all of this water that just never stops coming. And you're following these three sisters after their dad has died, and it's kind of their reactions to their father dying and what they're going to do kind of with his house. But you're following them throughout their lives, and it's just this incredibly eerie, really atmospheric story. But at its heart, it's all about these sisters' relationships and how much their relationships mean to each other, and just like the absolute toxicity of their relationships as well. Even when they do love each other, they are just so cruel and mean to each other too. I just loved everything about this one. I don't want to tell you too much more about it because I think it's like one of those books that is just like very unsettling and you can kind of figure it out as you go along. But absolutely loved it. 5 stars from me this month. And next up, I'm very shocked that this book is going to be ranked so high, and it is a classic, and it's actually a Dickens. This is David Copperfield, and I shouldn't really be surprised that I'm rating this book so highly because I am reading it because I enjoyed Demon Copperhead last year so much. And then I decided I had to finally read the source material after swearing that I wouldn't read another Dickens again. But my mum and my friend Alice both love this book and have told me many times that I should read it. And so I eventually did. And I read this all in 1 month, within a couple of weeks. I did it as a mixture of reading it physically and the audiobooks, because in this physical book there is loads of illustrations. And wait, let me just find one to show you because they are absolutely amazing, and they really actually add to like the tone of this book. I'm not sure if you can fully see that, but yeah, they really add to this book, and I really loved it. So this book is all about David Copperfield, and he starts his life with a loving mother, but everything kind of changes when she remarries, and it's basically telling the story about his entire life from when he is a very young boy and living in a terrible situation, and kind of how he makes his name in the world and the friends that he makes along the way. My favorite thing about this book is I love the main character, I love David Copperfield, but I also just love the tone of it being at times like incredibly tragic and really heart-wrenching, but also it always had this like slightly whimsical lightheartedness to it, and I really enjoyed that because it is quite an adventurous story as you're following this boy and then this young man as they are trying to figure themselves out. It's a true like coming of age story, and there are so many characters in this that like really offer that comedic relief as well from the more dark and tragic storylines. In particular, I think my all-time favorite is David's aunt in this. She's just an absolutely amazing character, and I really now want to watch the movie of this as well because I really want to see, I don't know, I'm just so intrigued to see how this is going to be done in a movie because I've never seen it before. I would say if you've read Demon Copperhead and you absolutely loved it, I would definitely read the original source material if you haven't already. It's so worth it, and also just like I think it gave me more of an appreciation also of Demon Copperhead because it managed to also somehow keep this tone, this quite like mixture of the tragic and the heartwarming and that kind of thing. And if you really liked that like I did, then you will get the same thing with the Dickens novel as well, despite it being a pretty hefty big boy. But yeah, so that was a 4.5 stars from me. The only reason I'm not rating it a full 5 stars actually in the end is because I wasn't obsessed with how this story wrapped up. I think that there was a lot of time spent with a lot of side characters and side plots, and in the end I kind of wanted it to wrap up with David Copperfield himself in, I don't know, a bit of a different way. It felt very neat, and it felt very like a little bit like a foregone conclusion by the end. I don't know, like I just wasn't obsessed with the ending as much, but still really enjoyed this book overall, and it's a easy 4.5 stars from me. Next up in my 4.5 rounded up to 5-star books is going to be a book that completely took me by surprise this month, and it is And the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer Every Morning. I say this wrong every time. Is that the actual? I don't know. And every morning the way home gets longer and longer. I think that's the name of the book. This is by Frederick Backman. I've read a book by Frederick Backman before and I didn't really love it, but this one, the hype is real. It's so good. It's a tiny short story. It took me like, I don't know, an hour to read, probably less than an hour, and I was bawling by the end of it. If you are in the mood for a cry, then definitely check out this book. This is about 3 kind of generations in the same family, a grandfather, a son, and a grandson, and the grandfather is dealing with dementia and memory loss. And this book is just, I just don't like, I was worried that this would be kind of a cheap, I don't know, like a cheap kind of pull on the heartstrings to make you cry, but it's not. It's beautifully layered. It's so touching and so heartfelt, and I genuinely could not stop myself from bursting into tears. If you're in the mood for a cry, if you love sad books, give this a go. Even if you don't normally like sad books, I do think it's worth it. Won't take you long to read, and just absolutely like lodged its way into my heart and made me absolutely cry, but in kind of a good way, like for like the beauty of life and family and love and that kind of thing. But yeah, be warned going in, it's a tearjerker. Next up, a book that I've been meaning to read for a very long time, and lots of people in the comments have actually told me to read this so many times, and I finally have read it, and that book is All My Rage by Sabaa Tahir. So this book I gave 4.5 stars. I really loved it, and it's the best young adult book that I've read in a long time. So this book is kind of set during 2 different timelines, but mainly you're set in California, and you're following 2 different teenagers as they are struggling with various things in their life. Both of these teenagers are Pakistani, and they have quite different relationships with their Pakistani heritage, with religion, and with their families. Basically, you are following these 2 teenagers who have been friends since they were tiny, and you join them just after they have had this huge fight in their friendship, and they have like broken off their friendship, and they're kind of floundering without each other, and you are following as they kind of come back together and the various things that happen in their life as they are trying to struggle to make enough money to survive, to potentially escape the small town that they grew up in, and also as they get closer together as well. This book was so good. I think it's got that perfect young adult feel of like there is a lot going on. There's a very good plot going on, and there's quite a fast-paced plot, and there's a lot of the like teenage dramatics there as well, which can make this book quite like fun and like pacey to read. But also there is so many deep questions being grappled with in this story about identity and survival, and like what would you do to survive and to try and thrive, and also with the love story at the heart of it being based on their friendship. It was just very touching. I thought this book for some reason was going to be quite similar to As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow, which I didn't love that much because of just the actual writing and the tone itself. And for some reason I thought this was going to be really similar to that, and it's not. If you're looking, and I should have trusted because I've read other Sabaa Tahir books and she does write amazingly well, so I should have trusted that, but out of the 2 I would definitely recommend this one more. The only reason this is knocking off a like half star for me is because I feel like some of the characters, especially the adult characters, so not the main 2, their storylines, I just couldn't quite feel like the emotional ups and downs. Like I just thought, okay, you're kind of just a terrible person. Like I know that they're trying to make me feel bad for this person. It's not really working. I think you're just being terrible, you know? I didn't quite get the full character arc for these side characters, but yeah, that is All My Rage. Next up, another 4.5 star read that I read this month is Tell Me Everything by Elizabeth Strout. These books are really difficult to explain. This is the second one I've read from Elizabeth Strout in this same series. I've read them not in the right order. I think I read like number 3 and now I'm reading number 5. But they all have recurring characters, but they kind of focus on a different character each time. But they are mainly following a woman called Lucy and kind of the people in Lucy's life. But this one is actually focusing on Bob. But these books are really hard to describe because on the surface, this book would be like a kind of murder investigation story, but I really wouldn't say that if that's what you want like to read this book, because this book is so much more about friendships and kind of the important things in life when you become later in life, and how you realize what's important and how you're supposed to kind of be living. And yeah, it's really about like friendships and relationships, and I don't know, it's kind of almost like it celebrates like the mundane on like a very like simple level, and like going on walks with a friend. And that's where the title of this book comes from, because Lucy and Bob would be going on walks and they would say to each other, you know, tell me everything. They would just share and tell each other what's going on in their lives, which is like sometimes incredibly mundane and sometimes something to do with a murder investigation. But this book at its heart is all about those connections, and I really like these books, and I find them hard to talk about because they're just very unique in the way that they are told. But I would highly recommend, if it sounds interesting to you, then dive in and just jump in, because they are really good. And then next up we have the next book in the Graceling series. So I read Bitterblue, which is book number 3, I believe. Yeah, it's book number 3 in the Graceling series by Kristen Cashore. And this one, I read the other 2 books in this series like much earlier on in this year, and then I've taken like a big break. I think maybe because this was just like such a big one and it really intimidated me, the size of this one. And I really enjoyed this. I didn't love it. This one is a 4-star read from me, but I did like it. It's hard to describe this series because there is I'm in the 3rd book and I don't want to spoil anything for the first 2. But in this book, you're following Bitterblue, who is a character from a previous book, and she has just taken on the mantle of like ruling her kingdom, and she is quite lost. She's a young woman and she is relying a lot on the advisors around her, but she is trying to like rebuild her kingdom after a period of like huge loss. And she is looking around her and not sure who to trust and not sure how to rule, but also she's a young woman and she wants to explore life and have fun as well. And basically, if you're born with eyes of 2 different colors, you develop a grace, and the grace can be anything. It can be that someone is an incredibly skilled fighter. It can be that you're an excellent cook or a storyteller, or that you're a really good swimmer. It can be incredibly specific. Bitterblue herself doesn't have a grace, but she has to rule a kingdom where these things do exist, and I really enjoyed like the political complexity that was going on here and trying to figure out the mystery that was at the heart of this. There's kind of a romance subplot. I thought with how many pages we would have, we would get more of that and more of a resolution, because that is something that I've really enjoyed in the first book in this series. Graceling is my favorite so far because of how the romance happened. I was hoping for more. Like, I feel like I know where it's going to end with this particular main character, but we didn't get there, and I was kind of confused by that. So this was a 4-star, maybe like a 3.75 actually, now I'm thinking about it. But it was very fun, but does not touch on the first book in the series, which is still my favorite, but it was better than the second. So we're going back up again. I did like Bitterblue quite a lot, and I will be carrying on and reading the next book soon in this series too. Next up, we have another classic. I was really ticking off some books that I've had for a long time this month, and that book is The Name of the Rose. This one was so interesting. Okay, let me settle in. And how do I talk about this book? It was so strange, and I'm rating it, so I'm giving it like a 3.75, like 4 stars, I think, in the end, because how do I even feel about this book? It's so confusing. Basically, this is a book that is set in the medieval times, and you are following Brother William and his young apprentice as they arrive at this abbey. And basically, this abbey is about to host this kind of very theological discussion about Jesus and whether Jesus was poor. It's kind of confusing. A lot of the theological arguments seriously went over my head, and there was a lot in this book. But basically, when they arrive at this abbey, there is a unexpected death, and then the next night there's another death, and basically you are following Brother William as he is going around this abbey and trying to find out what is happening. So it's a Sherlock Holmes style mystery story where he is going around and like sneaking around this abbey at night and trying to figure out clues with his young assistant, who's actually the person who is the perspective, like you're reading the manuscript from his perspective, the young assistant. But also this book is really all about actually kind of like symbols and meanings and like double meanings and theological arguments and kind of the fear of knowledge and like how knowledge can be corrupting. And it's a very, very interesting book. I'm not sure that I could like strongly recommend it to many people because it is so dense. There's a lot of like straight up like untranslated Latin in this that I obviously just have to skip over. Like I cannot read Latin. A lot of the language can really just go completely over your head, or like went over my head. But then there is moments of like real humor and like the relationship between the like assistant and like Brother William, like it's very it can be very funny and like really unexpected, and the way that he goes around, he's like such a good character, like just discovering these clues and solving this mystery, and it just like did actually keep me really hooked. And then it would lose me with these like big kind of discussions, and then I'd be like really gripped by something, and then like it was just like it was a push and a pull, and it was just like nothing else I've ever read. And so it was very, very interesting book. So it's very, yeah, I don't know how to, so in the end I'm saying I'm rounding it up to a 4-star, but it was a confusing one. So that's The Name of the Rose. And next up, I finally finished The Wheel of Time. I finished it. I read the final book, which is called A Memory of Light, and oh my god, like what am I gonna do without this series in my life? Honestly, probably be a lot more relaxed. I've been reading these books for I think 3 years, and that's the longest I've ever taken to read a series, although like some series I guess I've given up on. But I was never going to give up on these, or I thought I was actually in the middle, but then I came back to them and I finished them this year. I finished them relatively quickly this year, actually. I read 4 this year, which is like pretty good going for me. And the big question is, was it worth it? And I'm not sure, honestly. Like, I know that these books, anyone who gets all the way to the end and who reads all 14 of these books has to become a huge fan of them. But I'm not. I don't know. I'm gonna do a whole separate video on my thoughts and feelings about The Wheel of Time. They're so important. They're a huge epic fantasy series, and they have like really moved on the genre in so many different ways, from kind of like where Tolkien, I guess, kind of like invented it and then left it off, and then The Wheel of Time has like kind of moved on from there. But did I enjoy most of these books? Did I enjoy my reading experience of most of these books? Like, only at times, you know. Like it's a very complicated relationship I have with The Wheel of Time, and I feel like I have to properly sit down and really do a video and dig in and talk about everything I loved and everything I didn't love as well, and also with the ending. Yeah, I'm like, will I ever read them again? Absolutely not. Will I recommend them to people? Only some people. I rated this in the end, I've rounded it up to a 4 stars because I think I was just relieved as well. Although it was good. It was good, it was action orientated, it was fun, it had like pretty good, you know, ending. I don't know though, I was like expecting this one thing to happen, to be like this twist, and it just didn't, and there was no twist. I don't know. I will do a separate video. If anyone cares about my Wheel of Time opinions, I'll do a separate video about it. So from going from one of the longest books that I read, which was about like 1,400 pages or something, The Wheel of Time, one of the shortest books I read this month, although not the shortest, and The Way Home is probably even shorter, like 30 pages or something. But then I read a novella, which is Exit Strategy. And this book is, I think, the 3rd book in the Murderbot series, and unfortunately I did not really love it. So we're going down now, like this is maybe like a 3-star read. And I do think I'm probably rating this slightly unfairly, because I feel like if I would have read this immediately after finishing the 2nd book, if I would have read all 3 of the first ones, or like, is this the 4th one? No, I think it's the 3rd one. If I would have read them very quickly and close together, I think I would have got a lot more out of it and really enjoyed it. But I think I just dropped the ball on it for too long, and then I came back without remembering the details of like all of the different things that are going on. But anyway, these are a very fun sci-fi story, and you are following a murder bot. So it's a combat robot who is programmed to be like a security unit for humans who go out on like exploring missions and that kind of thing. But this robot has actually hacked its own system and kind of has its own consciousness, and basically all it wants to do is sit down and like watch media all day, which is incredibly relatable. But it's trying to hide the fact that it's not actually a combat like security unit anymore, and it kind of goes on these different adventures. They're very cute and like kind of wholesome despite being called Murderbot, but they're also very like action orientated as well. Like, they are very heavy sci-fi. So this one was just okay for me. I think I'm glad Murderbot ended up back with some of familiar characters, but I just wasn't as super invested, which is a shame because I really liked number 1 in this series. Basically, I think I'm just chasing that high too long. Next up, also for a 3-star read, me and my friend Alice read the next one in our Agatha Christie mystery solving journey, and we read The Mirror Cracked Side to Side. This one was really fun. Alice absolutely smashed it out of the park and guessed the ending pretty early on, which is fun in a way, but also when you kind of guess very early on, it's like everything just adds up towards that one guess, and then you just realize how much like fluff is in the rest of the book that then doesn't get resolved at all. Like there was characters that were just thrown in for like one line. It was very strange. Like I think that because this is one of the later ones, the editors sometimes aren't as like sharp on like, I don't know, with some of the later Agatha Christie's, like if you know, you know, this is one of the later ones. The mystery itself, like the solution was genius, and I was so impressed with Alice for getting it, but overall the plot, like it wasn't one of our absolute favorites, but it was fun. And then next up for my 3-star reads, I read Sorcery and Small Magics. This is the one that I actually finished this just yesterday, and it delivered exactly what I was expecting it to deliver. This is a kind of cozy and whimsical slow burn romance, and basically in this story you are following Leo and Grimm, and they are both attending this academy together as magical students. One of them is a scrivener and one of them is a caster, but they have had long running grudges against each other for various reasons, and they're kind of academic rivals in a way. Leo is very like unserious and just wants to have fun all the time. He comes from a very rich family and kind of like knows he'll be okay no matter what. Grimm on the other hand is like a very serious person. All he wants to do is succeed, and he just can't understand like Leo's like take on life. And basically something happens that makes them forced to hang out with each other a whole lot and kind of go on this adventure to a deep, dark, like unquiet wood, seek out a mysterious witch. And there's a lot of like very familiar, very like fun plot beats in this one, and I really enjoyed how slow burn the romance was. The thing is for me is that I would have preferred, I think, a dual perspective. I just wanted some from Grimm's perspective because this is all from Leo's. I would have liked to see tension from both sides, but if you like cozy, magical mysteries with slow burn, like proper kind of enemies to lovers tension, then I think that was done really, really well in this. So like the romance was my favorite part on this. This is the first part in a series, and I do already think I've guessed one of the twists in the second book from like the beginning of this book, so that's kind of, I can't rate it like much higher. Just for my preferences, I prefer the plot to be a little bit more like twisty or complicated, but this one is very nice, like autumnal vibes as well. So I'd really recommend picking this up in October when it comes out, because this book comes out on the 17th of October. So keep your eyes peeled because it was definitely a very fun read. So I would recommend. And then next up, another 3-star read. Unfortunately, it was the book club book that I picked for the month of September for the Reading Around the World book club. So if you don't know, I host a Reading Around the World book club. You can click the link in the description. I host over on Fable, and every single month we read a different book from a different country. And for the month of September, we read for Ecuador, and this is the book that we chose. And I am glad that we read this book because it's quite different, I think, from a lot of the ones we've been choosing recently. I think it's nice to have a break from some of the like heavier classics, and this one is a more recently published like magical realism story. It really did give me Encanto vibes in this book, but for me, I just had a real problem with like the pacing. Like, kind of like the middle portion of this book, I was very confused about what was actually happening because there's a big time skip that's not quite explained. I don't know, I was listening to it actually as an audiobook at the time, so maybe I was just like completely missing it. But basically in this book you have Orquidea Divina, and she lives in this big house and she has a big family, and then one day when she is dying, she calls all of her family to come and visit her to get their inheritance. And then when they arrive, she basically transforms into a tree, and her family are kind of gifted with these different powers. And then you follow mainly 3 different characters in her family and their lives after, when they kind of come into the gift that Orquidea has given them, and they are trying to figure out what actually happened to Orquidea. Why is she so magical, and what happened to her in her life that made her so secretive? I really liked Orquidea Divina as a character, and I actually wish that she was in this more. We have a lot of flashbacks for her, but I preferred her perspectives actually a lot more than kind of her grandchildren perspective. And I wanted to know even more about her life. Like, how did she build this house? Like, why did she settle in this place specifically? Like, why, you know, there's so much that I felt like that I would have wanted to know a lot more, and we spent a lot of time with other characters that I didn't care as much about, but it was very fun. And I can also see other people really loving this story because there is a lot of like lush writing, and there's like, it's very magical, and it's also kind of like a slow story that kind of weaves together. So I can see people really loving this one. It just kind of wasn't totally for me. Next up we have we're now in the like 2-star kind of range. We have a 2.5-star book, and unfortunately it is a romance book. I picked this up on a complete whim because I just had seen loads of people talking about it, I think last year, maybe this year, but it just seemed so cozy, and that is the Pumpkin Spice Cafe. So this one is just like one of those romance books that is just like so seasonal and topical, and I'm always slightly wary about them because I do think that they really rely on the aesthetics rather than the plot. There was actually nothing much wrong with this. It was completely fine. It wasn't like incredibly cringy or anything, which is why like I kind of get worried about certain types of romances. This was fine, but it just wasn't anything extra than just fine, if you know what I mean. This is all about a woman. She got a big scare in her corporate job when her boss died, and she decides to take up her aunt's offer and go and take over the cafe that her aunt has always run in this very small town. And then on the first night, she meets the very handsome farmer man who comes to deliver some pumpkins to her cafe. Basically, there's immediately chemistry, but there's kind of a push and pull because he's had bad relationships in the past. The whole town usually gets involved. It kind of is very much like plays on small town vibes, but also a lot of like the reasons why they're not together, do they really exist? No, there's not much tension in this book. If you're looking for something super sweet, super easy, no complications, then I would recommend this book. It's exactly that, but I wouldn't say you would come away from it feeling like obsessed. Like, you're not going to really remember these characters very well, I would say. Next up, we have a book that I was slightly disappointed with, and that is A Sunny Place for Shady People. This is another short story collection from Marina Enriquez, is that how you say her name? I read her previous collection, The Dangers of Smoking in Bed, which I really liked. I didn't love it. I thought I loved it, which is why I requested to read this one early, but I actually looked back and I don't think I actually loved it as much as I thought I did. I think I was getting it confused with another short story collection, but these are horror stories. To be honest, it just felt very similar to the first one, but slightly worse. Each of the stories, like, I didn't really get a distinctive voice from any of the characters, and I just like, kind of was getting them confused in my head. I was like, it just sounds exactly the same type of character. Some of the ideas were fun, but I wasn't creeped out in any way, and I'm very easy to creep out, so I feel like it's not too hard to creep me out, and this one just, yeah, it didn't quite work for me. So the last book that I want to talk about, which is the worst book that I've read this month, but this is still 2.5-star book, so like I've done so well this month, and that book is the Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels. I'm still obsessed with this cover, to be honest. There was so much in it, you know? It was trying to do so much, and I think that if it just dialed back a little bit, it would have been a lot more successful. Basically, in this book, you're following Cecilia, and she lives with her aunt, and her aunt are part of this society of lady scoundrels, and basically they are pirates, which is very fun to have these like very proper and prim Victorian ladies who are actually secretly pirates. But the way that the author has made that work is that in this world, all of the houses fly. That didn't like make much sense to me. A lot of the world building of how they've made this kind of pirate society exist in the world didn't quite make sense. But basically this is a romance story because one day a assassin shows up at the door and tries to kill Cecilia for an unknown reason, and she's very excited about this because it is going to like do well for her in terms of the ranks of the scoundrel society if you've got a hit out on you. But then she starts to get closer to her would-be assassin, and then the whole society of the lady scoundrels begins to be threatened from an outside person, and escapades kind of continue from there. My main issue with this book, actually it was kind of almost explicitly said right at the end, is that Cecilia herself doesn't actually do anything. She's a great character, and like there is a lot of witty lines in this, and I really enjoyed a lot of the dialogue, but actually what she's doing herself is like not much at all. Everything is happening purely just around her as she is just there, and that just like kind of irritated me. Also, I'll be honest, I just didn't love the love interest in this. Like he came across immediately as quite slimy. I just didn't really like his vibe. I thought he was a bit skeevy and I just didn't really like it. Also, he's blonde. It's not my type. This one I would have given like a 3 stars just purely for the fun and the silliness of it and like the witty banter, because actually a lot of the dialogue is very funny. Like it's very good wordplay and it's like very silly, but all of the things that were wrong with it, it knocked it down to a 2.5 for me. So the worst book I read this month though, and it was not that bad, so I've done so well this month. That is all the books that I read. I think that's 18 books, which is absolutely insane. Please let me know if you've read any of these books this month. I would absolutely love to know. Or if I've encouraged you to read any of the ones that I've recommended. I really do hope that you do read some of the ones that I really recommended at the beginning of the video. Let me know if you've read any of the Booker Prize as well, and also let me know what you're going to be planning on reading in October, because I'm about to try and sit down and sort out my TBR for October, and I'd love to know what everyone else is going to be reading. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please remember to like and subscribe, and also turn on notifications so you know when I'm posting my next video, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye!